Wide area network connections. Is that still a thing? Yes, it's still a thing, and by the time we're done here, we will examine how businesses design their wide area network or WAN connections. Now to do that, we need to move a little bit beyond Mike and his toothpick factory to a business with even a grander vision than taking the world by storm with chocolate toothpicks. It's the pet store of dreams, because we know if we build it, they will come. The pet store of dreams is going to be this chain of pet stores that has expanded worldwide to find homeless pets safe shelter and distribution to hungry owners that want them. Hungry owners could be misinterpreted in so many ways. Loving owners that want them. So the pet store of dreams will have an internet connection. And I want to make sure that as we talk about this, the one connection we all have doesn't get confused with a wide area network connection. Internet access technically is a wide area network connection. However, when we think of WAN, we usually think about connecting businesses to business through typically private connections. And there is a lot of diversity in the WAN connections that we can have, but it breaks down into typically two big umbrellas. If we want the pet store of dreams to connect to other pet stores of dreams, we will usually do that through leased lines or packet switched network connections. Now, there are other WAN connections out there, such as dial-up modems. You know, boom, those are typically known as circuit switched. But the bandwidth on them are so low that people only use them for emergency connections, as in everything's down, network connectivity everywhere's on fire, and we're not on site, so we have to dial in to a backup modem to try and access the network devices and figure out what's going on remotely. For our data connection, we'll usually purchase lease lines, which are just like they sound. They're private connections between businesses where one connection connects to one other site. So let's just say the Pet Store of Dreams headquarters right here is connected to all these little Pet Store of Dreams offices. Each one of these lines represents a single office connection. If this store wants to reach this store, it has to go through the headquarters or purchase another lease line connection to make that happen. Usually when people talk about things like T1 lines or E1 lines, if you're over in Europe, this is the kind of connection that they're referring to. The great thing about lease lines is it's your bandwidth. If you're not using it, no one else is. And you have a pretty solid guarantee where we're connecting from one site to another site and it's up all the time. The drawback in lease lines is, one, they're not very flexible. One-to-one, one site to one site. It doesn't scale all that well when you have thousands of different locations. The other thing is they're kind of expensive because that bandwidth is dedicated to you. The service provider literally takes a scalpel to their line and they're like, okay, that goes to that customer. We can't reuse it elsewhere. And that's why most network connections have evolved into technology like this. Now, MPLS or Metro E are two primary examples of packet switched networks. Whereas lease lines is a circuit that's quote unquote tacked up. That is, we're always going the same path to reach one destination. In a packet switch network, we leave the carrier to some diversity. They can use their own network and their own judgment to get us through their network to our different sites. Likewise, it's a lot easier for them to build connections instead of just everything coming back to the headquarters. They can build connections through something called virtual circuits to connect the site together. Because it's easier for the carrier to do this, they don't have to physically go out to all these locations. They can do it virtually within there through one physical connection. We usually get the benefit of cost savings using virtual circuits. This is how we would design our wide area network to connect all of our pet stores together. But I haven't yet given you the why. Why would I do that, Jeremy? Well, the reason why is because when you have a private WAN, meaning your own WAN connections connecting all your offices together, you have control over that, which means you have one thing that the internet has not been able to offer as of yet, and that is quality of service. That is, when you send the packet from one side to the other, the service provider will guarantee that it will get there within certain time limits, with minimal packet loss and all that kind of stuff. So you have an SLA, a service level agreement with them. When you're talking about critical traffic like voice over IP or data replication or data backup or stuff that you just can't lose, that's a lot of times where these private WAN connections come in. That being said, the internet is getting better and better. I've been seeing a lot of businesses like our pet store of dreams right here just use straight internet connections even for voice over IP systems. Meaning, let's just give a quick scenario here. Let's just say this is the headquarters. Obviously, it'd be a little bigger than this. And that's where they install all of their voice over IP servers. At the sites, all they have to do is stick a phone, maybe 1 or 2 phones inside of each store, because it's a pet store. They're not going to get a whole bunch of calls. But those phones get their dial tone from the servers sitting in the central. Okay, I'm done. It's just that it was too easy. All these faces just appeared in my mind. They get their dial tone from those servers, and what I'm saying is, a lot of businesses are finding they can save a lot of money eliminating WAN connections. That's why I started this whole nugget by saying, WAN connections, are those still a thing? They are, and there's still a lot of places that use them, but businesses are starting to save money by just using the internet connections with virtual private networks. That is, they encrypt all the data. So all these sites would have internet connections because those are a lot cheaper than the leased lines typically. And they would use virtual private networks, that is encrypted connections, to get all their voice over IP traffic back to the headquarters. It may not be perfect. It may not have a lot of those SLAs and quality of service, but the internet is pretty good nowadays. So a lot of people are taking the risk. What I want to leave you with is just a visual of what an example wide area network design might look like. This might be MPLS, which, by the way, stands for multi-protocol label switching. It's just one of the current fastest methods to implement packet switch networks that a lot of enterprises are using. We might have a bunch of large offices with their routers that connect into the MPLS cloud. And this MPLS cloud, you see the dotted lines, the reason it's showing up like that is because it appears like a switch, because everything's kind of connected to everything. And we have the control of dictating how the traffic flows through the carrier network. The beauty of a lot of the modern wide area network design is that it's put a lot of the control back in our hands rather than us waiting on slow service providers to bring up the connections. And if you work for a service provider, I'm not saying they're all slow. I'll just say most carriers don't move at the speed of modern business. So putting the power in our hands is very effective. Metro E is another big wide area network type that carriers within a metropolitan area have begun to deploy. That's where the name comes from. Metropolitan Ethernet means you've got all these carriers that are digging up the streets and neighborhoods and cities all over the world. They put not just one single strand of fiber, but just gobs of fiber in there because they never want to dig up the street again. Well, that gives them the flexibility to say, well, how about I sublease a lot of these fibers to you? That's Metro E, to where you can now use, and it goes into dark fiber. There's all kinds of different types of technologies that's out there. Just on a wide area network overview, Metro E allows you to connect a lot of the metropolitan areas together. It works well within cities and between big cities. For example, I live in Phoenix. There's a huge metropolitan Ethernet network here that Cox Communications supports. Actually, can I just take you to a whiteboard really quick? I think this will make a lot of sense. I know many of you know that I run a company. It's called VIA. We do IT services for schools primarily. And we have a pretty amazing WAN design. And I think if you see this, it'll demystify a lot of these things for you. So we've got all of these schools. So let's just say this is Arizona. Actually, it is. And let's just say we've got all these schools in Arizona, right? They all have internet connections. Every single one of them, a direct internet connection. But they also have a metropolitan Ethernet network. That's a private WAN connection because we want them to connect to our data center. Now, by the way, you can call this a private cloud, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit later. That's a data center. Now, what's in that data center? Stuff, secret stuff. All the stuff that we provide to the schools as part of our value add. Voice over IP servers. We've got security servers. Essentially all kinds of stuff that we deliver to the school. But probably one of the things that's most important of all is an internet connection. And not just one, a lot of them. It's a data center. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, I don't get it. I thought all the schools have an internet connection. Oh, absolutely they do. But what if that internet connection goes down? We've designed it redundantly to where the school can come across the private connection into the data center. And once the data center realizes, and you're going to know how to do this by time we're done with all of the skills that you need to put this together. Once the routing in the data center realizes they're trying to get to the internet, they go right out here. The school never knows what internet connection they're using, whether it's fed through the private network or direct to the public network, and they access all of the services in that data center with quality of service. But here's where my thought was going that inspired this whole whiteboard to begin with. VIA has grown to multiple states. We have a bunch of schools in Texas, and all of those schools have their own internet connection. I'm not going to draw it because it's off the whiteboard. It's up there. And they also connect to their own Metro E cloud. Shunk, 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 shunk. And what's fun is that bridges into its own data center with its own internet connection and everything else that's sitting in Texas. And then we do this. Private WAN, Metro E. What? Metro E? I thought that was just within the metropolitan area. Bonus. When you go between metropolitan areas, the carriers have been in this long enough to run their own fiber network that they can use. So I can go from Texas cities over to Arizona cities over fiber optic cable at a fraction of the price that we used to charge for these kind of things. Now, if you happen to be with a carrier that's big enough to support Metro E across multiple cities, sometimes you won't even need the data center there. You could have one cloud that kind of goes between the two cities. Is this making sense? Let me expand it a little bit different. In Texas, we don't have the same service provider that we do in Arizona. In Arizona, it's Cox Communications. In Texas, it's Spectrum. Often, if it were all the same, like Spectrum doesn't exist in Arizona, but if they did, if this was Spectrum, I could just have one big cloud. I wouldn't even see these two lines. I just had to bridge the data centers together because these are separate carriers. They don't talk directly. I've said too much, but it's so good. That's the idea of WAN architecture. It's not going away. It's not gone. It's still there. It's still alive and well and probably will for many years. Businesses have decided to move their connectivity over to the internet, and that's fine. There's a lot of other ones that still use those private network connections known as a WAN architecture. So you've now seen how businesses design their wide area network connections, both my fake businesses, pet stores, and little spontaneity on the fly, my own business. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.